The top business stories live from the Sky News City studio. The housing market continues its recovery with home sales rising for the fourth consecutive month. Another record day for the FTSE 100 will be bringing you all the latest from the markets. Shares of Philips surge as it settles a long-running legal battle in the United States. Plus, the virtual wine seller using AI to help collectors keep track of their bottles. Good afternoon, this is Business Live with me, Ian King. Further evidence of the recovery in the housing market activity came today with news that home sales rose in April for the fourth consecutive month. The monthly house price index from the property portal Zoopla reveals that 12% more home sales were agreed in this month than in the same month last year. That was despite a sharp rise in the cost of servicing a mortgage. Zoopla estimates annual mortgage repayments for a typical home buyer are up 61% on 3 years ago. Two-thirds of that is due to higher mortgage rates, with the rest being down to higher house prices. With me now is Richard Donnell, Zoopla's Executive Director. Richard, good to see you today. Some people might be quite surprised at this, given that interest rates have yet to come down.
That's right, but I think consumers have seen that the interest rate cycle looks like it's peaked. There's lots of talk in the media about interest rates coming down. Mortgage rates have come down to about 4.5%, and that's been enough to sort of bring people back into the market. We think we're on track for about 1.1 million sales this year. That's 10% up on last year. It's still below the long-run average, so we're seeing a recovery in activity, but we're certainly not seeing any real pickup in prices.
Yeah, what are the risks to that forecast?
I think the real risk is major uncertainty over the election, which, again, at the moment, the two political parties or the two main parties seem to be quite aligned, so there's not a huge difference. I think the other risk is that mortgage rates actually go up, which they're drifting up just a tiny bit at the moment, but I think mortgage rates of 4.5 in the 4% is enough to sort of keep people back into the market. I think if mortgage rates went above 5, then you'd be back to sort of probably bigger price falls and less turnover. Yeah,
and are sellers achieving their asking prices?
There's been some firming in that over the last 3 months. The kind of low point was last October. People are getting about 96% of the asking price now. That's improved by about 15-20% over the last few months. So, again, even though rates are higher, mortgage rates are higher, people want to move. And the people that do want to move just need to be realistic if you're a seller. And then there's not a huge gap between buyers and sellers at the moment. Buyers have got a lot more choice. There's 20% more homes for sale than there was a year ago. So that's going to keep a lid on prices, but activity should pick up.
What sort of properties are selling well just now?
Well, it's always the two-bed property and the kind of classic three-bed house. We've had a big increase in the number of 4+ bed homes. And the more expensive to buy, probably hit with affordability. So it's your three-bed house that sells the fastest, followed by a two-bed property.
And what about regional variations? What are you seeing around the country?
Well, activity's picking up across the board, but I think in terms of house price inflation, prices are firming. So in the regions outside the south, property prices have actually gone positive now year on year, very small amounts. But in the south of England, price falls remain pretty embedded. You know, we see 100% of homes in the whole south of England in markets where prices are still falling year on year. So, again, it's affordability. That's where higher mortgage rates have impacted buying power the most. In the north of England, affordability is that little bit better, so people have got more chance of buying.
And what about this unwind of pandemic-related buying? I mean, a lot of people, there was the so-called race for space in the lockdown and the immediate aftermath. Anecdotally, it sounds like some people who've got a bit of buyer's regret now are struggling to sell those properties.
Yeah, I think you can see, you know, when we look at where house prices are falling the most, it's all along coastal areas in southern England, from Norfolk to Kent, along the south coast and into the southwest. So prices went up the most there over the pandemic. Affordability's been stretched. Some people are again selling up to sort of come back to be closer to work again. So there's a little bit of that sort of playing out, but nothing too major. It's just having an impact on house price growth.
And what are you seeing on the pricing front? Are prices rising in parts of the country again?
So year on year at minus 0.2%. I say slightly positive in the Midlands and the north of England, still down by up to 2% in the east and the southeast. So prices are effectively net flat. And I don't think really we don't really want a lot of house price growth. I think a lot of people in the industry, businesses, estate agents, house builders, lenders, would much prefer volumes to be increasing rather than prices going up and adding to those affordability pressures.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that puts a spring in the step of potential buyers, I guess.
It does, and I think so. I think it's, you know, we're in balance on prices. We don't think prices are going to go up very much at all this year. You know, I'm just hoping that we get more volumes through.
As you mentioned just now, we have seen a slight uptick in mortgage rates over the last few weeks. Do you think this is a bit of a temporary phenomenon, or do you think this is a bit entrenched? We obviously had a price war earlier in the year.
Yeah, there's fierce competition in the mortgage market. I think that mortgage rates are priced off what money markets think is going to happen to interest rates. I think there's been a lot of revisions back in just how many cuts we're going to see in the second half of this year. And so for your typical 5-year fixed rate, it's got down to about 4.5. It's starting to drift up a little bit more. But again, I think as long as mortgage rates stay below 5%, I don't think it's going to kind of derail this steady pickup in market activity.
Now, we've seen a fair bit of kite flying, for want of a better word, in the newspapers of late from the Chancellor, hinting that there could be a cut in stamp duty in an autumn budget. How unhelpful is that from the industry's point of view? Because it could persuade people to sit on their hands and wait until they get one.
Yeah, it's not particularly helpful. It does lead to sort of fluctuations and people expect what might happen. I think the challenge of stamp duty is it's a tax on southern England. London and the south east account for half of all stamp duty. And so, again, it tends to impact the south of England more than it does in other areas. So I think there's a big case for reforming stamp duty, but very quickly you get into wider discussions around property taxation, different forms of way of taxing. And again, I think the status quo probably always ends up being the winner in the end.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it certainly feels that from a London point of view, things are getting much, much busier after years of the market being in the deep freeze, effectively.
Yeah, I think that the housing market in London it was incredibly hot in the run-up to the 2016 Brexit vote, tax changes, and prices have effectively gone sideways, particularly for apartments. And so London's picking up in terms of activity, but pricing remains sort of under pressure just on affordability.
OK, Richard, got to leave it there. Good to see you as ever. Thank you. Some other business news stories for you now. And shares of Philips surged by as much as 47% earlier today after the Dutch medical technology giant unexpectedly announced it has settled a long-running legal dispute in the United States. Philips will pay $1.1 billion to settle personal injury claims following a recall of millions of ventilator devices used to treat sleep apnea. It did not admit any fault or liability. Well, the settlement meant Philips reported a net loss of €999 million for the first 3 months of the year, compared with one of €665 million in the same period last year.
Having the economic loss court approved, we also resolved personal injury and medical monitoring with a settlement. And actually that gives a lot of clarity on the way forward for Philips. On top, we received an insurance settlement where actually we'll get an inflow of more than 500 million of insurance money to offset some of the product liability claims that are out there. So overall, this gives a lot of confidence in the future of Philips.
The grocery delivery app Getir has abandoned a European expansion that is set to result in the loss of about 1,500 jobs in the UK, confirming a story first broken last week by Sky's Mark Kleinman. The move comes days after the Istanbul-based company, whose name is Turkish for to bring, raised money from investors to fund its withdrawals from international markets, including the UK, Germany, the Netherlands and the United States. It had already departed other countries, including Italy and Spain, following growing losses, and now plans to focus on its domestic market. The music investment company Hypnosis Songs has agreed to an increased takeover offer from the US private equity giant Blackstone, valuing it at $1.572 billion. The increased offer, first reported yesterday by Sky News, trumps an offer agreed last week by rival investor Concord. Hypnosis floated on the stock market in 2018 with the idea of buying songs and exploiting their rights in TV, films and computer games. Artists whose songs it owns the rights to include Lady Gaga and Blondie. And the average cost of comprehensive motor insurance has risen by a third over the past year, according to the latest figures from the Association of British Insurers. The ABI's motor insurance tracker suggests a typical policy costs £635 during the first 3 months of the year. That's compared with £478 in the same period last year. However, compared with the final 3 months of last year, premiums were up by just 1%. The ABI said this showed how competitive the motor market is, with insurers absorbing significant cost increases but keeping prices relatively stable. And shares of Petrofac fell by 30% today after the oilfield services company announced a delay to publication of its 2023 results. Petrofac, whose clients include many of the world's leading energy companies in the Middle East, North Africa and the UK North Sea, also revealed some of its creditors have offered it a $300 million credit line. It said this was likely to require the conversion of a significant proportion of its existing debt to equity. Now, if you're lucky enough to have a big wine cellar full of the finest vintages, keeping track on what you own and when it should be consumed may be harder than it sounds. First world problems indeed. The online retailer Curated has designed a new AI-powered virtual cellar, the Curated Metaverse, which enables owners to organise and view their collections. I've been speaking to Alfonso de Catano, the founder and chief executive of Curated.
The idea was, as a big wine lover, to bring the curation of the best wines to collectors from all over the world. But given my background, in technology, I spent more than 10 years at Google. The idea was to try to do something different because there is a key issue in wine for collectors that is provenance. And to try to solve that problem, we decided to use blockchain as a technology for authenticity and traceability of bottles. So in order for us to do that, we had to go straight to the source, going to producers, get bottles directly from them, and then apply an NFC label, near field communication, the same that you use when you pay in a shop, and then to register each bottle in blockchain so that then we could trace let's say, what are all the movements of the bottle after it moves from the producer to the warehouse, then possibly to the client home or to the restaurant. And it's proving, to be a very interesting solution for clients because everyone loves to drink bottles from perfect source.
How big a problem is fake wine in the world of fine wine?
So it's difficult to say, but they're saying that more than 30% of the wines of the old vintages that are actually going around are fake. So it's really a massive issue, and I think it's a big problem not only for clients that are paying a lot of money for wines and then prove to be not really great when you open. And this was one of my frustrations as a big collector, buying also an auction, opening bottles that were completely dead. But it's also a problem for producers because you try a bottle maybe for the first time from that producer, and you don't really like it, and then you end up saying, I don't want to have bottles from this producer anymore. So I think it's an important, problem to solve, for both sides, both clients and producers.
You're also trying to take fine wine into the metaverse with a virtual wine cellar. Can you ever really replicate the experience? I mean, wine drinking it's a very sensory experience. It's all about taste and smell. You can't do that in the metaverse, surely.
Yeah, that's correct. But what we are trying to do is something different. So as a collector myself, I have a lot of wines in different storages, like in London or in Geneva. And today, the experience for me to keep the bottles in perfect condition is just to go online and to look at an Excel file with all my bottles. That is not super exciting. You cannot share with your friends. You know very well that if you are a collector and you have the bottles at home, it's more difficult to keep them in perfect conditions. But then when your friends are coming, you want to show them the wines. You start to imagine the beautiful dinner that you can have with them in the future and so on. So we are trying to create a different world where when you buy bottles with us and you keep them in our warehouse, you put a beer on, and you can invite your friends, and you can walk in this cellar that we created, and you can see the bottles because we create 3D model of every bottle. And every time you touch the bottle, you get a sense of reality because you can see the NFT of the bottle in the back. So it's true that you are in a virtual space, but you can actually see and touch the bottles that you bought. But the other thing that you can do that you cannot do at home is that you can ask the assistant about the bottle and you can learn and nurture your passion. So you can ask about, the vintage of that bottle, you can ask about the producer, the specificity of the appellation, how old is the vineyards, of that specific wine. So there is much more that you can try to add with technology. And that's where we felt that it was a good investment to make. And we are really at the beginning of this journey because I think we are with Metaverse where maybe we were with Internet around 25 years ago. So you can only imagine what this might become in the next 5 to 10 years. Instead of putting, an Apple Vision Pro or a Meta Quest that is quite big today and not very comfortable, I would say, but gives you the potential of the technology. Maybe in 5 to 10 years, you just put a pair of glasses and you can have that exactly same experience.
Well, still to come here on Business Live. The FTSE's in line for another record close. We're bringing you all the latest from the markets up next. Don't go away.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
They have breached the road. There is a lot of gas being fired all around us. It is an absolute carnival kind of atmosphere out here for Prime Minister Modi's decisive victory. These students are defying the prohibitory orders, and now they're going to be arrested. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news.
The roads have been inundated. The only way out is to get people by boat. This on any given day would have been bustling with people, but today it's absolutely deserted. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
Traveling is not just about the destination. It's also about how you get there. Fly Emirates, fly better. Fly Emirates, fly better. Thank you.
Well, in Europe, it's been a mixed session for equities today. Things started out pretty brightly, but a number of markets have sold off as the session has gone. Only the MIB in Milan, the only positive gainer among the main continental European indices. Draw your attention to the IBEX in Madrid in the bottom left-hand corner. That's fallen after the embattled Spanish Prime Minister, Pedro Sanchez, insisted he would be staying on. His wife is currently the subject of an investigation by the authorities in Madrid. In terms of the talking points, well, Philips is the biggest, as you might imagine. Talked about them earlier in the programme. Another major talking point today is Deutsche Bank, whose shares have fallen by as much as 9% in Frankfurt on news it faces making a major provision regarding litigation that concerns its takeover of Postbank back in 2010. Well, here in London, the FTSE 100 hit a fresh intraday high, and it's, as you can see on the screen, just about eked out a fresh closing high. I think that's the fourth in a row, though, well off its highs in the session. It was knocking on the door of 8200 earlier on, but the FTSE still finishing in positive territory. In terms of the features, well, Anglo-American, the miner, is the leading blue chip gainer. That's risen by just over 4% on hopes that rival BHP will raise its offer for the company. Well, Mike Ashley's Frasers Group is also ahead as it announced a new £80 million share buyback programme. Also on the screen you can see there, Beazley, the Lloyd's of London insurer. We had the chief executive of that company on the programme recently. It's finished up 3% following a trading update. Outside the FTSE 100, the online gaming tech group Playtech is up 12%. And I have to be honest and say there's no obvious reason why. There has been a lot of consolidation talk around the sector of late, however. Meanwhile, Petrofac, which I mentioned earlier on, well, that's finished off some 34%. That's on the delay to its annual results and the fact that shareholders are going to be diluted in a bid debt for equity swap. Over on Wall Street, all of the main stock indices have opened to the upside, led by Tesla, which is ahead by some 10% after its self-driving technology cleared some regulatory hurdles in China. Apple is also up on reports that it has reopened discussions with OpenAI about incorporating some of its technology. Apple nearly 3% to the good, as you can see on the screen there. The big event in foreign exchange markets today has been a surge in the yen, amid signs that the Japanese authorities have been buying the currency. It hit a 34-year low against the US dollar last week. Sterling's had a pretty decent session, currently up half of 1% so far against the US dollar, up a quarter of 1% against the euro. The single currency, meanwhile, up just over a fifth of 1% against the greenback. Meanwhile, the oil price, well, that has drifted lower earlier in the session. It's consolidated those losses as the day's gone on. Barrel of Brent crude will currently set you back $88.39 a barrel. That is off a little under 1.25%. But joining me now is Victoria Scholar. She's head of investment at Interactive Investor. Victoria, good to see you. Let's start with Deutsche Bank, because we often think about America being a very, very litigious place. This is really a reminder that Europe has its legal snarl-ups as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's certainly punishing Deutsche Bank's shares today. They're having a pretty bad day, shedding about 9%, which reduces its year-to-date gain to about 20%. I think this is the biggest one-day slump we've seen since the summer of 2022. And like you say, this is all to do with litigation, a long-standing lawsuit that looks like it's going to rule against the lender. The lawsuit claiming that Deutsche Bank underpaid its shareholders for the Postbank deal, and it could cost the bank up to 1.3 billion euros, which is equivalent to about a fifth of its pre-tax profits in 2024. And there are concerns that this could negatively impact Deutsche Bank's ability to up its dividends and share buybacks, which of course investors won't be too happy about, because that's something that it promised them last year. But, you know, this comes in the context of some very strong results from Deutsche Bank, reporting its highest quarterly profits in 11 years just this month. And you talked about the parallels with the US. It had pretty strong fixed income trading and revenues from its investment bank, which obviously is typically where Wall Street tends to lead the way.
Yeah, good results from Deutsche Bank the other day. I mean, staying with litigation themed, I mean, we have the CEO of Philips on the programme this morning. This is an extraordinary I mean, this is one of the biggest blue chips in the Netherlands. You just don't get moves like this for a big blue chip company.
No, absolutely. The stock market cap was up by about a third today, hitting the highest level in about 26 months. And I'm sure the CEO would have been very pleased about the developments, investors as well, breathing a sigh of relief that its settlement costs relating to this ventilator recall that's been going on for a long time are likely to come in much lower than expected. $1.1 billion is the estimate, still hefty, but below forecast for around $2 to $4 billion. And actually, some analysts have penciled in $10 billion. The other thing is that this announcement has come more quickly than expected. So that's also helped to ease investor nervousness. But this is a stock that's been heavily punished by this overhang over the last 3 years. It actually led to the departure of its former CEO, Frans van Houten. It's led to thousands of job cuts and a profit warning. And even after today's surge, the stock is still trading at about half of its share price of where it was back at the highs before all of this came about in April of 2021.
Yeah, absolutely. Huge business. It's very, very important to the Dutch economy in particular. Closer to home, Anglo-American. Obviously, people are assuming there's going to be a bump here, as we say, in the trade-in from BHP.
Yeah, well, there was the Reuters report over the weekend that said that BHP was considering a renewed bid for Anglo-American, and that's helped to lift shares in the takeover target towards the top of the FTSE 100 today. But also, we're hearing reports that BHP has told its investors that its $39 billion bid was in line with its strategy, and it wants to take a disciplined approach. So I don't think we'll be looking at some hefty hike in its next bid, but we could still see some sort of uptick to try and lure Anglo's investors in. But it's pretty clear why BHP wants to get involved here, and it's Anglo's copper assets, which are majorly significant both in terms of the green energy transition and demand for electric vehicles, but also in terms of artificial intelligence as well, because it's used in data centers. So it's a commodity that is hugely central to two major global shifts. So it would be an interesting mega merger if we do actually see it cross the line.
It really would be. And a word on Tesla. Obviously, Elon Musk was in China over the weekend. It seems to have brought some dividends.
Yeah, we thought that he was going to be going to India. In fact, he's turned up in China, and we've seen that the stock today has surged over 15%, which has helped to narrow that year-to-date loss that a lot of investors were worried about. I think it's all been about the fact that he's struck a deal to bring the electric car giant closer to rolling out autonomous driving features in China. It's done a tie-up with Baidu, which is a Chinese search engine, to use its mapping and navigation technology. So we'll have to really see how this plays out. But Elon Musk is making some very interesting moves and managing to support Tesla's share price, even in the face of some really difficult headwinds lately that have resulted in pretty weak earnings in the latest report.
Indeed so. Victoria, got to leave it there, I'm afraid. Good to see you this afternoon. Thank you. That's it from me. I'm back again with the next edition of Business Live tomorrow morning at 11:30. Hope you can join me for that. In the meantime, do stay tuned. Coming up after this short break, it's Mark Austin with the News Hour and, of course, all the latest from Edinburgh. Thanks for joining me this afternoon. Hope to see you tomorrow. Cheerio.